Good afternoon and welcome to today's webinar provided by Solar Plaza as a prequel for our solar PV trade mission to Argentina and Uruguay that will take place from 6 to 10 June in Buenos Aires and Montevideo. In the coming hour we will learn a lot more about the market status and potential for solar in Argentina, which could well become the surprise market of LATAM in 2016. My name is Tom van Dorp. I am working at Solar Plaza since 2010 and currently Manager of Business Development and Sales. I'll be moderating this session today, and in a minute I will give you a short introduction of our company, Solar Plaza, and our upcoming events. First, I want to give you an idea briefly what to expect in the coming hour, and I will run you to today's agenda. I'm very thankful to announce 3 speakers today. We will start with an introductory presentation on Argentina's legal, political and economic climate from Diego Cesar Bunge, one of the partners and founders of Estudio Bunge. He will be followed by Nicolas Repila. He's also a partner at Estudio Bunge, and he will present the regulatory framework for renewable energy of Argentina. And then last but definitely not least, we have Marcelo Lando from Eternum Energy, our local partner, who's going to present more on the electricity market, financial outlook and the opportunities for solar development and investment in Argentina. A few practical notes. Yes, the presentations will be made available afterwards. You will receive an email to get access to them. During the session, you can ask questions at any point through the webinar via the chat box, and I would like to encourage you to ask questions because we will have time for questions at the end of the session. The session will end in about an hour, but we will at least have 10 to 15 minutes for questions at the end of the session. And questions that are not addressed, since we have a lot of attendees in the session, will be addressed to the speakers afterwards, and you are always free, of course, to address them to them in person. If you have any technical problems, don't hesitate to drop your issues in the chat box. There is a technical support desk available who will try to help you out and solve your problems immediately. With you, we have over 250 others signed up for this virtual conference, and all of you are here to learn more about the potential of Argentina's solar market with different questions, but hopefully we can answer many of those. Since we've reached all of you, I don't want to bother you with a lot of the promotion about or information about Solar Plaza, but very briefly, Solar Plaza is established in 2004. Over the past decade, we've done over more than 70 events globally in over 20 countries. We've built up a very strong network worldwide, and one of our strengths is organizing trade missions to enter and explore new markets. So Argentina and Uruguay will be colored on this map soon. Yes, so this webinar is an introduction and is to help you learn more about the market in Argentina, because this is a fairly new market, of course. With the new president, there is a lot of change in the country, and to learn a lot more about this, we'll organize a trade mission to Argentina and Uruguay to really help you to explore the opportunities in this market. This event will take place from 6 to 10 June. 4 days of this will be taking place in Buenos Aires, but we'll also spend a day in Montevideo in Uruguay. A more established market, but definitely a market with interesting lessons to learn and some opportunities still as well. In this week, you will be meeting all the key stakeholders and government officials in both countries. Please, if you're interested to sign up, contact us soon because there's only 40 spots in the trade mission delegation. It's going quite fast. Our last trade mission to Colombia and Panama in November was sold out, so it's not to promote sales, but it's really honestly a high demand project. And one of the keys of this trade mission that you're in a small group, and therefore we're able to increase the quality of your experience. Part of it is a conference, a 2-day conference, where we have over 100 local companies, Argentinian companies involved, and that makes the picture complete. Some of the sponsors are announced already. Of course, there are more opportunities, but I want to highlight our diamond sponsor, Jinko Solar, Tesan as a gold sponsor, and as networking sponsor, Voltic. As mentioned already before, Eternum Energy is our local partner helping us on the ground, and together with Estudio Bunge in Argentina. For the Uruguayan part of the event, we're cooperating with CPA Ferrer and Ficus Capital. And great to have their support as well. Briefly, the program outline, but much more of this can be found on the website www.pvtrademissionargentina.com. But very briefly to this, it's a 5-day event. The first 3 days will be in a small group, which is the trade mission delegation. We'll be traveling all over Buenos Aires, and we will be traveling to Montevideo with the ferry for 1 day on Wednesday. And in both markets, we'll be meeting with all the key stakeholders there are to meet. So it's really a way to meet with everybody you basically want to meet in such a short time. And especially on the conference, you'll be getting the opportunity to meet up with a lot of local companies. This is a conference focused on Argentina and tailored to local companies. So it's the perfect place to meet your potential partners and to start working on first projects. To give you a little bit of impression, because we've done many more trade missions. One of the latest was in November 2015. I was responsible for that one as well. We had this one was sold out. This is a grasp of the companies that were involved there. It's a high-level group of companies, so don't forget and underestimate the power of being in such a group for a whole week. It was very valuable, and that was also the feedback that we got, for example, on this trade mission, but also in the others. You can read through this later, but I want to emphasize it's really an incredible experience. It is an investment, both in time and in money. It's different from a normal conference format, but it's encouraged to attend by a lot of the people that have done this before you. Maybe interesting as well, next to this webinar, in cooperation with Eternum Energy, we've brought out a white paper called Argentina's Second Chance. It is available on our website for download, so don't hesitate to learn more about the market and read out more information there. Of course, contact me or contact one of my colleagues if you're in touch already. More contact details are on the website, but here are mine at least. I'm happy to answer all your questions, and yeah, of course, would love to get in touch about further involvement. And I'd like to announce our first speaker. I will do all three at once, so you have an impression who are going to speak, because they will speak all together at once, and after their speeches we will have 10 to 15 minutes time for questions, so don't forget to address the questions that you might have. This is your chance. First speaker, and I'm very honored to have the support of Diego Cesar Bunge. He's a partner and a founding partner at Estudia Bunge, one of the leading Argentinian law firms. They're a content partner of this event, and he's going to speak today about Argentina's legal, political, and economic climate. Followed by Nicolas Repila, his colleague, also a partner at Estudia Bunge, working on regulatory framework for renewable energy, and he's going to share a lot more about Law 27191 today, the law where it's all about in regards to the future of solar. And last, Marcelo Lando, as founding partner at Eternum Energy. He is running now an Argentinian solar development advisory company, but before that he's been 6 years with Silver Ridge Power, a company many of you most certainly know, and he has been based in Washington, D.C., London, and Madrid. He has experience in solar across 7 countries in total, with 522 megawatts installed. Today he's going to tell us more about Argentina and the electricity market, financial outlook, and opportunities for solar development and investment. Nicolas, Diego, and Marcelo, thank you for your support. I'm going to give the word now first to Diego. Diego, you should receive an invitation to share your screen now so that we can all see your presentation.
Thank you, Tom. Good morning to everybody. Good afternoon to some of you. We, from here, have been living throughout 120 days of, I wouldn't say hectic, but very active business days regarding the changes proposed by this administration that took office on December the 10th. And what I will try to describe briefly in about 10 minutes is some of the characteristics of these changes, which are really very profound, even dramatic, and mean a lot as to the environment to do business in Argentina. Firstly, it implies the abandonment of a paradigm of an inward-looking, allegedly self-sufficient, rule-breaking, and anti-establishment country, domestically and internationally, This has been a characteristic over the past 12 years, and that has been explicitly left behind. In doing that, the new administration has adopted a new paradigm of being the traditionally adopted pattern of Argentina of being a Western Hemisphere capitalist society, now member of G20 and avowedly aiming to become a member of OECD. In the past administration, it was very explicitly stated that the very notion that there be an adequate and an amicable business environment derived from rule of law was an artificial notion created by the so-called concentrated groups, rather a very, let's say, ideological approach to the matter in order to justify steps taken to have precisely that inward-looking approach to matters. In taking a different stand, the new administration has adopted a concept that rule of law and economic and institutional predictability are indispensable stepping stones for having a long-term sustainable growth process pursuant to what established in the national constitution and to integrate the country to the world. In doing that, the government has taken some concrete steps which are taken pursuant to those fundamental changes of approach. One, the lifting of export withholding taxes to critical agricultural and mining sector exports. The elimination of barriers to access of foreign currency to pay imports, dividends, interest on loans, commissions, royalties. That is called locally the lifting of the cepo, meaning sort of some sort of absolute barrier of entry to foreign currency that existed factually imposed by the prior administration. A declared openness of governmental departments and agencies to receive and analyze new investment initiatives, public, private, PPPs. This is very different to the prior approach of the administration, with which it was very difficult to establish any sort of dialogue in this regard. This is important. Surprisingly, in December 10, took office not only a new administration at the federal level, but which is the same as this autonomous city of Buenos Aires, but also in the province of Buenos Aires, being these three jurisdictions in a federal country, meaning almost 40% of the national product. Also in Mendoza and Cordoba, very important provinces in Argentina, we have administrations that have the same perspective as the Macri administration. The new administration doesn't have a super majority. There's no imposed decision-making power by this administration, so there is a need to negotiate, and we are seeing that happening particularly regarding the bill lifting the barriers to negotiate with the holdouts. That was negotiated and very successfully negotiated. At the same time, the government has to clean up its table, and there are measures being taken to depart from price control mechanisms, reform of several controlled regulatory steps put in place under the avowed purpose of consumer protection in the past. As a matter of fact, that was described by the prior administration as being the sovereignty or the consumer sovereignty of the Argentine people. Well, that notion is being left behind. At the international front, Argentina has taken very quick steps to try to solve key international conflicts. The most outstanding of them is the holdouts in a very successful manner. The ICSID claims, the WTO infractions, the GAFI violations, the IMF reporting requirements, and conflicts, a multitude of them at the bilateral and multilateral levels. At the same time, it's interesting to see that one of the first steps internationally that the President Macri announced when taking office in December 10th was the unexpected trip to Davos on January 21st, 2016, and had a very successful round of meetings there with most important world leaders. Also a declared objective to become an OECD member, a resumption of IMF supervision of national accounts under Article 4 of its charter, a very active participation in G20 bodies as we speak, a reaffirmed commitment to respect and protect human rights domestically and internationally, surprisingly fast and expedient settlement of the holdout litigation in New York, with record-setting new sovereign bond issuance allowing re-entry of Argentina to international capital markets after 15 years in default. That is happening today. Not everything is rosy. There are problems in this transition. We shall mention some of them. There are at the federal, provincial, and municipal jurisdiction level, we see many budgets in the red on account of the spending policies of the past administrations. That means you have to look at significant budget deficits, and there are administration transition processes with important personnel and functional redefinitions. Very important to bear in mind an inflation rate that is surpassing the 30% per annum threshold, that has an impact upon peso-denominated long-term transactions, and that means that the government is studying and discussing monetary reforms, the so-called CEPO, which we can go into in questions if you wish to. There is some level of unrest on account of derived from personnel layoffs at the private sector and at the public sector, at the federal, provincial, and municipal levels. At the same time, there is a starting of collective bargaining agreement pressures for salary raises on account of that high inflation rate. This is a concern on account of its potential impact, further impact on inflation. Going specifically, and this is very important, one of the first measures taken by the administration, December 16, 2015, a very important decree by the federal government declaring the electricity emergency. This is taken in line of the national systemic economic crisis emergency declared in 2002. The causes stated there is the lack of carrying through of the unilaterally mandated contract renegotiation processes under the National Economic Emergency Law of 2002. That law of 2002 has been prorogated until December 31st, 2017. In that very emergency decree, it stated the absence of a rational tariffary framework to give clear messages to users in their different categories. The lack of an adequate compensation system in the wholesale electricity market, giving proper investment incentives to the different players in the market. An inadequate performance of federal jurisdiction concessionaires, Edenor and Edesur, to provide the service according to meet the current and future demand levels. A dramatic increase in the average of service interruption, frequency and duration. On account of those causes, among others, the executive branch delegated in the Ministry of Energy the running of the General Electricity Framework Law. On account of that and the financial situation of the wholesale economic electricity market, impacted by a compensation system that does not reflect the real cost of production, added to the fact of the level of indebtedness of market agents with the wholesale electricity market, required that there be a continuous support of the National Treasury amounting for 2015 90 billion Argentine pesos, meaning at the exchange rate after devaluation of more than 6 billion United States dollars. That brings to the table the necessary analysis of the current financial standing as eventual off-takers in the new framework of CAMESA, Edenor, Edesur, and that's something to take care as one of the challenges. The Energy and Mining Ministry is the enforcement authority of the new framework and is the public sector authority to deal with in this regard. What we are going to see hereafter are precisely steps taken by this ministry in order to implement the powers granted by the electricity emergency. Thank you, and I give now the floor to Nicolas Repila.
With the background that Diego has just mentioned, in September 2015, the Argentine Congress passed Law 27191, which amended and complemented Law 26190, which had been passed in 2007. The law of 2007 had declared of public interest the generation of renewable energy and fostered investment in research and generation of new sources. It also established a target of 8% of electricity consumed in the Argentine grid to be generated from renewable sources by 2017. Due to a variety of factors, however, this law did not obtain the expected results. Although the law was supposed to be complemented by new regulations within 90 days, they were passed only 3 years later, in 2009, when the Argentine economy had started to slow down, inflation was growing, and the Argentine government had hardened its position vis-à-vis defaulted bondholders, which turned the country even less attractive for long-term investment opportunities. Also, international markets were only shyly starting to recover from the international crisis of year 2008. As a result, by 2016, less than 800 megawatts of renewable energy are currently available in the grid as installed capacity, which represents only 1.8% of the total annual electricity consumption, which rises to 130,000 gigawatts per hour. The new law was passed back in September 2015 and entered into force in October. It was passed in the final days of a very, very fierce political presidential campaign, but still found overwhelming support of the relevant political parties, which seems to demonstrate that renewable energy has finally entered into the agenda of policymakers. On March 31st, 2016, only 20 days ago, Decree 531 was dictated by the Federal Executive Branch. Said decree complements and supplements Law 26-190 as amended by Law 27-191. The decree sets forth the guidelines and main principles for the development of energy projects, delegating in the Ministry of Energy and mainly in the Subsecretariat of Renewable Energy the procedures for meeting the goals, energy tenders or auctions, as well as the implementation of a trust fund to help finance the development of renewable energy projects and assist in guaranteeing the payments of energy generated. Those are the main regulations of the Argentine Renewable Energy Legal Framework. As you may see, they are very recent and there are still many in process of being sanctioned, such as those that rule the terms and conditions under which the government will tender the purchase of renewable energy and the structuring of the trust fund for project finance. What are the main features of the new regulations? They set a national renewable energy mandate with an initial 8% target of national electricity consumption coming from renewable sources by the end of 2017, ending in at 20% by the end of 2025. How is the government going to meet these mandates? Their plan is to conduct tenders to procure this renewable energy for all the demand of the country. A distinctive factor is that renewable PPA costs will be passed through to all consumers. However, large consumers defined in the law as those with electricity demands that on average exceed 300 kilowatts will have the option to opt out of the government system and procure their renewable energy themselves through renewable energy IPPs, traders, utilities, or self-consumption projects. Therefore, all PPAs will be tendered by the government, except for purchases by large users who opted out. Another relevant aspect is that the government has set strong fiscal incentives to renewable projects to reduce PPA prices. Let me take you now to the rationale of these regulations. Because of the timing, Argentina is entering the renewable energy markets at a relatively mature international policy stage. The new government has valuable insights of what worked and what didn't in many other countries. For example, given the options of an IFT or feed-in tariff, as in many of the European countries, as opposed to a renewable energy standard like in the US, legislators opted for an approach similar to that of the US. An important fact is that the obligation to comply with these mandates in Argentina, instead of being targeted at utilities, was targeted to consumers. Part of the reason is that the balance sheets of Argentine utilities are not solid these days because during the prior government, electricity prices were frozen. Therefore, the current government decided to put the obligation on consumers. Still, the government takes along the mandate to meet these targets. Aside from large users who opt out of the system, CAMESA will act as off-taker in all PPAs for the supply of electricity sourced by renewable energy. CAMESA is a company whose shareholders are generation, transmission, and distribution companies and large users, and the Secretariat of Energy, which has veto power over all decisions. The Secretary, that veto power is the only one that can be exercised by the shareholders. CAMESA is also the entity that manages the Argentine wholesale electricity market, including operation and dispatch of generation. What are the main features of the new regulations? As I said, they set new principles focusing in transparency and market rules. They, as also I said, they established an 8% target of national electricity consumption, ending up at 20% by the end of 2025. The target established is in the regulations applied to all electricity consumers, no matter its size. The large consumers that can opt out of the system are those which have electricity consumption of aggregated in order 300 kilowatts in aggregated all. There is a 10% deviation tolerance per year, otherwise penalties apply. The penalties are equal to the variable cost of generating electricity with imported gas oil, which has been estimated at $200 to $220 per megawatt hour at current gas oil prices. The regulations set strong tax benefit and incentives to local IPPs for projects built between 2016 and 2025. The earlier the project comes online, the stronger the fiscal benefits that are applicable. I'll describe these tax benefits ahead. The regulations also created a trust fund called Fund for the Development of Renewable Energy. Its main purposes are to provide project financing and guarantee payment of PPAs by CAMESA. The trust fund will be funded by resources of the National Treasury, which has initially allocated $800 million and specific charges established over power demand will also apply. As I mentioned before, the trust has not been structured yet, although the word is that people are working around the clock on it. The structuring of this trust is very important because it will give investors and financial institutions a higher degree of certainty of the risk involved. The law does not establish minimum local supply content, but it does provide market and financial incentives to projects that use local supply. The prices for renewable energy are capped at $113 per megawatt hour. PPAs signed by large users cannot establish a higher price in average. Well, I mentioned before the tax incentives. I'll go over them now. There's an early value added tax refund. As a reference, solar panels are subject to a 10.5% VAT rate. Also, there are accelerated tax depreciation of assets involved in the project. The non-operating losses may be rolled over to 10 fiscal years, while the regular term is 5 years. There is an exemption of import duties for all projects started before December 31st, 2017. The law has defined that effective execution will be deemed to exist upon the occurrence of expenditure of funds relating to the project for an amount no less than 15% of the project's total expected investment. Also, project owners that use at least 60% of local components or 30% if the components are unavailable locally receive a fiscal certificate for 20% of the local components cost that may be used to offset taxes or even be assigned to third parties only in one time. Also, there's an exemption of income tax on dividends. The income tax arises to 10% of the dividends, of the amount of the dividends, if subject to having this amount to be reinvested in infrastructure or new renewable energy projects. Well, that was a brief overview of the legal framework. I'll hand over the speech to Marcelo.
That's an incredible overview, Nicolas. Thanks a lot also to you, Diego. This is it already gives a lot of insight into the effort that the Argentinian government is putting into making it attractive to develop solar in Argentina, and it's incredible to see all the an overview, this great overview of all these incentives and tax sources that are out there. So it looks promising.
Fantastic. Thank you, Tom. And also, I need to thank the Bunge law firm, because they've invited me to this very nice meeting room here in Buenos Aires, and I'm glad to be here with them. I think that by now we all have a very good overview of what are the legal, the political, and the economic climate conditions in Argentina given by Diego, and then an excellent summary of what makes the fundamentals of the new renewable energy regulation. So now we are going to dive a little bit more deep into what is the power market here in Argentina, and what are some of the opportunities that we see for renewable energy players that many of whom we have been in contact and we've worked before when we were at Silver Ridge. But I think there are a lot of lessons learned from the past that we've seen now in Argentina, and it's certainly interesting how the market is shaping now. So let's briefly discuss what are going to be the key discussion points of this brief presentation. We're first going to go into how is Argentina comparing to some of our neighbors, where we'll see that we are going to enter the market at a relatively late stage. This is not necessarily something bad, particularly for renewable energy companies. The second, we're going to see what is the market size, and then we're going to go into how could solar compete to get that share of the energy mandate that the government has put with this new law. And last, we're going to see some of the multiple alternatives that we're analyzing in the market and that we see that can be attractive. Still, as was mentioned in the presentation before by Nicholas, there are some details that continue to be clarified. This is a new regulation, and we expect the Ministry of Energy and Mining to continue to disclose more details. So going into the regional market, one thing for sure is that if we see the chart, Argentina is almost inexistent. There are only 8 megawatts of solar in the whole country. If we compare to our neighbors, you know, many of you perhaps have been working or are now working in Chile, Peru, or Mexico, or even Brazil and Ecuador. These are all markets that have begun to flourish. If we look to the forecast of what our new installations going to be like in the coming future, then we are going to see that there's going to be a ramp right in 2016 for sure. Let's just look at what happened in Chile. You know, similar to what happened before in the ages of the gold rush when everyone went to California. The growth is just astonishing. You know, in 2013 there was no solar megawatts in Chile. By now we see that there are there's probably going to be online over 1.5 gigawatts in 2016. So that's pretty amazing. Now, when we see what is the size of the Argentine electricity market, we're going to see that in 2015, there were 136,000 approximately gigawatt hours. So we've modeled what could this mean for new renewable installations and what are the size of the opportunities. If we look at 2017, when the mandates described earlier would begin to occur, that is an 8% of that generation, assuming the same capacity factor that the renewable generation currently has in Argentina. There are about 800 megawatts of renewable installations, mostly small hydro. Then we see that in 2017 and 2018, there's approximately, in the last line you see in the chart, there's approximately 3.1 gigawatts of new generation that's going to be that's going to be required in order to meet the mandate. Now, when we look at 2019 and the mandates going from 8% to 12%, there's another jump of about 2.2 gigawatts between 2019 and 2020, and I think that this is important because that will continue to happen as mandates continue to rise until 2025. If we look into the last line of new renewable installations that would be necessary to meet those mandates, that provide certainly a relatively stable environment for growth for companies that are interested in Argentina. So what is the current renewable energy matrix and the power overall matrix? Well, Argentina is 60% approximately thermal and 30% large hydro. So that leaves very little room for renewables, particularly solar. It's only 8 megawatts as we've seen before. But when we break down the thermal generation, in the last 12 years, there has been very little planning with regards to the outlook of the future of electricity generation. So the way to attend the new demand generally was importing 1 megawatt diesel generators. In some cases, these were put in line up to 20 or 25 diesel generators. So if seen from the renewable point of view, that could provide an interesting opportunity for renewable energy to displace very expensive generation, because when looking at current oil prices, we've estimated that probably it's going to be between $200 to generate 1 megawatt hour with a diesel generation. Of course, this is very expensive, and that could potentially be the first segment that renewable generation will actually replace. Now, the law mentions renewable energy in general. So what is it for solar here in Argentina? As we've seen, the ramp rate of Chile, and we can see here in the map, a lot had to do with the wonderful solar resources that the country has. That allowed the developers and the renewable energy companies to offer very competitive prices, given that, as many of you know, the installation costs are very similar across different regions. So Argentina shares that very good area of excellent solar resource in the northwest of the country, where most of the projects are now being sought after, and many of which we are currently developing. Just to put you an example, if we see the chart on our right, we see that Abra Pampa, for example, in Jujuy, that has an annual global horizontal insolation of 2,300 kilowatt hours per meter squared per year. That's really, when comparing to, say, El Centro in California, where with Silveridge we developed a 265 megawatt plant, that's 1,900. So the solar resource in the northwest of Argentina is certainly going to help to be able to offer very competitive prices when considering the renewable energy mandate. Now, what is the breakdown of the electricity market in Argentina? Well, we have generally a 20% total market, and we have approximately an 80% of utility market, which is retail. Now, large users, which we will see in the next page, have the option, as was mentioned before by Nicholas, to generate their own electricity, their own renewable electricity. Then the retail, the small users, they don't have this option. So for the small users, it's clear that the government has opted, as many other countries did, say Brazil or Uruguay, or even private tenders as in states in the US, they are certainly going to go with renewable energy tenders. The government has also mentioned that the renewable energy tenders are going to be in the beginning specific for each technology. So we envision that these new renewable energy tenders probably coming up in June, by the time that we will be in the middle of the PV mission trade here in Argentina, we envision that most of the first renewable energy tender is going to be wind. However, it will set what are going to be the practices and what are going to be what to expect in the coming renewable energy tenders in the medium term. So taking out what would be the renewable energy tenders by the government, which still there are some details to be disclosed and to be clarified, there are options as well for private PPAs between renewable energy developers or renewable energy companies and the large companies. And by large companies, the law defines those that have a demand above 300 kilowatts. So these will be able to opt out of the system of renewable energy tenders organized by the government, and will be able to sign direct PPA projects either with new renewable energy projects, or one business that we are seeing that will probably pick up is to have intermediaries, as we have in other countries, that sell exclusively renewable energy to smaller companies and industries. The way that this renewable energy retail companies would work is that they would aggregate part of the demand and then sign PPAs with renewable energy projects. So I think this is a basic overview of what is the market, and perhaps, Tom, if you agree, then maybe we can open up to a couple of questions.
Yes, we can. Marcelo, thanks a lot for this very insightful and good overview. Really helpful. So I have lots of questions coming in from the audience. A few that I would like to pick out at this point. When do you, with regards to the tenders, when will be the rules of the public tenders unveiled? Do you know that already? Is that clear?
Well, some of the rules, as I mentioned before, have been already disclosed. Let me mention quickly two. One is that these renewable energy tenders are going to be technology specific, and the government is very focused in trying to get online megawatts very soon. We are now, the Ministry of Energy and Mines has declared an electricity emergency because we do not have enough capacity to meet the demand, so they want the megawatts online now. Projects that have been developed in the past have been mostly wind in the south of Argentina, and those are the ones that are more advanced. So probably in the new renewable energy tenders that we assume, according to public disclosures that the Ministry of Energy and Mines did, that this will happen in June. So most of that would be wind, and that tender could be up to 1 gigawatt. And the second, Tom, is that, as Nicholas mentioned before, also the government is putting in place a trust that they have already fed with $800 million, and this will help finance some of the renewable energy projects. So those are probably the two most important aspects of the tenders that still have a lot of information to be disclosed.
Interesting insights, Marcelo. Thanks for a lot for that. Another question from Rosa Tarago from Soitec. She's asking, how does Argentina plan to finance the financial support to renewables? I mean, we understand that the cost won't increase households' electricity bills, and that the government won't be willing to increase power financial deficit, but which solution is being considered?
So one way, as you mentioned well, Tom, and I think the participant is very well informed, and yes, the government is going to directly do a pass-through of the costs of the whatever costs are needed to put the renewable energy capacity online. They are going to pass through to consumers. One, through to distribution companies through the increase in prices, but then the distribution companies are also going to pass through that additional price to the bills of small and large consumers. This will come in their own bills as a separate item that will feed directly the trust that will in turn pay to the renewable energy projects. And Diego and Nicolas, before the call, they were mentioning that there are still many different details to be disclosed on that, and what is the legal framework of that particular trust is going to make a huge impact in what is the perceived risk for renewable energy companies and developers.
Are there any other sources to fund the trust fund?
Well, the government has already put 800 million directly from the Treasury. That's one source that will come directly from the government, and they will include and they will recommend to policymakers that they make an additional contribution to the fund that cannot be less than 50% of the funds that are saved to replace that very expensive diesel generation that we saw in the presentation.
Thanks for that. Another question: is self-consumption actually subject to grid fees?
Well, Argentina does not have currently a national distributed consumption mandate or specific regulation. And you know what, Tom? I think that as has happened in many other countries, I think that large scale is generally taking the bulk of the growth in the beginning, and then as the country matures and as the grid operators get more comfortable with the intermittency nature of wind and solar generation, then probably a distributed regulatory framework is going to be established. But we don't see that happen anytime soon, and I think that for the first few years, you know, most of the renewable energy mandate is going to be through large-scale grid-connected projects.
Okay. You mentioned already earlier in a discussion that we had that now is the time basically for companies to enter the market, to understand how the tenders will be set up and how solar can play a role in that. So and you of course encourage people to join the trade mission. But if you join the trade mission, how much time do you when do you expect the first projects to come online realistically? Because this might still take 1 or 2 years, if not longer. What is your expectation?
Well, that's a great point, Tom, because the there's probably one factor that Argentina has, a great advantage over some other countries, and it's that we have only one grid connected system nationally. So we don't have three as in Chile. They are working on getting everything connected, but currently we already have that transmission. So it's not going to be much a matter of the infrastructure being there for the first projects to be online, but it's mostly going to be, one, how fast can international companies, particularly and large ones, sign up PPAs and get on running when they opt out. And we've seen that Dow Chemical already signed a PPA for a wind project in the south of Argentina, so they are already on the run. And the second factor that is going to make a huge impact is when will exactly the government launch the renewable energy tenders. These have been announced for the period of May, June. There are still many open questions, so I'm not sure if the government might take the decision to perhaps postpone at least for 1 month these renewable energy tenders. Once the renewable tenders are out, as you know, renewable energy projects, they don't take too much time to build, and the tests are carried, and then the project can be in operation as fast as 3 months after the renewable tender.
Thank you, Marcelo. One last question with regards to the grids, because, for example, wind and solar are variable renewable energy sources. Are discussions running in regards to renewables grid integration?
Yes, the government is working really hard on this, and they've been in contact with many other countries that have been working on this. So this comes up to one of the points that was mentioned before by Nicholas, that policymakers now and technicians have a lot of information of what has worked and what has not worked in other countries. So I think that they will be able to very quickly absorb at least the first few projects. We do have some wind and this 8 megawatts in solar, so there is some very, very few experience, but it will take time for projects to come online, and I think they will be able to manage the integration very well.
Okay, makes sense. So there's some work to be done there. I get a lot of questions, so I'm not able to address them all at this point. So I would encourage people also to send me an email or send an email to Marcelo or to Bunge directly. We'd be happy to address more. I'm going to address a few more now. A lot of questions are about multilateral bank support. We all know that the country, we know that the country has been closed for debt in many ways. I've been speaking to, for example, IDB already, who showed interest to join the trade mission again. They've supported various trade missions already. I've been talking to FMO, to Proparco. I've actually called tomorrow with Proparco, and I'm trying to understand if there is an ability already for them to put any support and to give guarantees to mitigate risks. What is your point of view?
This is Diego Bunge speaking. Of course, there are currently some difficulties in having, let's say, fully satisfactory collateral for project finance in this regard. But the putting in place of this trust is one concrete measure in order to enhance the collateral and to give reassurance and comfort of being actually paid on one hand. Secondly, the government is particularly studying how to fund this trust and how to see that participants actually get paid throughout the process of the let's say, putting in line of CAMESA, etc. So we are seeing, this is an ongoing process, and we will see in the months to come the actual final picture of what to deal with in this regard.
What about CAMESA? I heard some notes from people saying that they don't have a bankable rating yet. How is the government thinking to manage this issue?
Well, the government itself, in the decree declaring the electricity emergency, has put in black and white in very clear terms the financial standing of CAMESA and the problems derived therefrom. The point is that on the one hand, CAMESA in itself has to be put back into the shape it was before it was, so to speak, taken over for political reasons and run more as a let's say, a matter of other policies than its very purpose, on the one hand. Secondly, in that process, the government is focusing on enhancing the securing of payment to participants.
Thank you. Diego, another question that might be directed to you as well. How will the law offer protection against the future change of government? Because we've seen where Argentina comes from. It's promising to see all this happening, but what if it changes and and the others come back to power in some years? Is there any danger of nationalizing assets or?
That's a very good question, given the past of Argentina. Precisely, we were discussing among ourselves prior to this webinar. Well, precisely, one cannot ignore what happened in the past in Argentina, and particularly in the sector. I'm not talking renewables, but electricity in the past, and how many players got caught in the systemic crisis of 2001, currently still declared by law up to December 31st, 2017. In that regard, as trust, confidence is built step by step, and along the way, that very trust is lost very quickly. That's a big challenge this administration has. The point is in order to protect oneself when taking the decision of investing in this area in Argentina, given the concrete measures advocated or given by this administration, is to structure your coming into this market from a secure jurisdiction that has a specific bilateral investment treaty with Argentina, a double taxation treaty, as well as a very solid, let's say, investment and financing structure. The final characteristics of what I'm saying will only be able to be completely defined once the government gives some more messages as to the final features of this trust fund and the auctions themselves.
Thank you, Diego. I would like to end with two more questions, but first I want to say thank you to all the participants. I understand that a lot of you have other obligations. We booked an hour of your time, and I hope this was useful for you. I want to end with just summarizing briefly that the recordings will also be available of this webinar, so you will be able to get access to those and look back what we've discussed. Also, if you've only been part of the webinar because of other obligations, you can still look back the other part of the webinar. So we will get this information to you in the coming days. Don't hesitate to contact us with any questions, and definitely not, if you're interested or considering to participate, contact us soon, because there's limited spots available, and we can put you on the reservation list if you're about certain that you will be joining as well. So please do so. Furthermore, I want to make sure that your questions come back with your questions to us, and we will try to address them to Marcelo or to Studio Bunge. And also there is a lot of info again in the white paper that is available on the website, so feel free to download that as well. It's complimentary. Last two questions, and these are, I think, more appropriate for Marcelo. With regards to larger intensive energy users, first question, what is the current energy price on average that these people pay?
Well, that's a great point, because as was also mentioned before in the last 12 years, prices and indications were not very good incentives, and what the prior government did is to freeze electricity prices, including wholesale prices. There was regulatory indication that the price should be around 100 pesos. This makes absolute no sense whatsoever, so the government had to, in addition, give...
In dollar cents?
Yes. 100 pesos is about...
$6 or $7, right?
$7. You know, it's crazy price, $7. So
$7.
$7. So, but this is what happened. The new government that took office on December 10, as early as in January, they mentioned that they would scale down the subsidies to generation and distribution, and in March they issued a law, well, not a law, but a regulation that they reduced by 40% the subsidies that were given. This of course had a lot of retaliation by individual consumers and companies, but now market prices are in the wholesale market are around $52, depending on peak or non-peak hours, and these will probably tend to rise because there's still a lot of subsidies being given. So we are seeing how the government is making very transparent what are the subsidies that they are paying, and they definitely want to use market mechanisms so that these prices, you know, are relatively reasonable to the end consumer.
But also, I think one of the main incentives is, of course, the penalty that they have to pay at a certain point, right?
Yes, for large companies that opt out of the system. So the penalty will only apply if you say, let me try to procure my own renewable energy, and if I can't, then I will pay the penalty.
Right, understood. Okay. A related question to this, could you make a rough estimate of the size of the market of Argentinian intensive energy users? Like with the power consumption maybe higher than 300 kW, kilowatt?
There are about 8,000 companies that could be able to opt out of the system, and by this I mean with an average demand of above 3,000 kilowatts. Probably in the beginning very few will actually opt out because, as you know, renewable energy in Argentina has not been, it's not an industry that is well known. So it will take some time for companies to get comfortable to develop their own projects, except of course for those international companies that have done this in other countries.
To end with, Marcelo, what is your recommendation or suggestion to international companies that are looking to develop or invest in Argentina?
Well, the first would be to come to the PV trade mission, and then an experience here by themselves and being able to interact with senior government officials and also key stakeholders. But I think that what we are seeing with others that we interact is that still it might be too early to jump on to the first renewable energy tenders as long as more details are not disclosed. So I think that the government is actually being very responsive to these new demands, and I think that probably they are going to try to disclose more details in the coming few weeks.
Okay. Well, I'm going to thank you, Marcelo, Diego, Nicolas, for the great contribution. I think this is almost like a mini recap of what everything is going on in the market. There's lots of things more to say about it, and we'll definitely do that in the weeks to come. We will keep you updated about the developments, also around the trade mission. Yeah, and I can only end with thanking you all and looking forward to hopefully meet you all in Buenos Aires on the 6th of June until the 10th of June. Thanks again, and we keep in touch. Best, Tom.
Thank you.
Thank you, Tom. Thank you to all the attendees.